The rain fell in sheets so thick that Iris Morgan could barely see 3 feet ahead of her as she stumbled along the muddy road leading away from Timber Creek. Her threadbare dress clung to her shivering body. Her shoes were long gone somewhere in the mud behind her, and her feet bled from cuts she could no longer feel to the numbing cold. She had been walking for hours, ever since she fled the boarding house where Gerald Hawthorne had cornered her in the storage room with hands that grabbed and a voice that promised things that made her skin crawl. Iris had fought him off with a cast iron pan and run before he could recover, but she knew he would come after her. Men like Hawthorne always did. So she kept walking into the storm, into the wilderness, with no destination and no plan beyond getting as far away as possible. When her legs finally gave out and she collapsed face first into the cold mud, Iris felt almost relieved. At least this way would be over. If stories about unexpected rescues and finding hope in impossible situations move you, subscribe now, because this journey will stay with you long after it ends. Iris didn't know how long she lay there in the mud and rain before she heard the footsteps. Heavy boots splashing through puddles, coming closer. She tried to lift her head, but couldn't find the strength. A shadow fell over her, blocking out what little light filtered through the storm clouds. Then a voice, deep as thunder but surprisingly gentle, spoke above the sound of rain. "Ma'am, can you hear me? Are you hurt?" Iris managed to turn her head slightly and found herself looking up at the largest man she had ever seen. He stood well over 7 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the sky, wearing a heavy coat that was already soaked through. His face was weathered and rough, with a thick beard and eyes that held concern rather than threat. He knelt down beside her, and even kneeling he seemed enormous. "I'm going to pick you up now," he said. "Don't be afraid. I'm taking you somewhere dry." Iris wanted to protest, wanted to say she was fine, but her body betrayed her by shivering so violently she couldn't form words. The giant man lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest where body heat felt like heaven against her frozen skin. He turned and began walking with long, steady strides that ate up the distance despite the mud and rain. Through her fading consciousness, Iris was aware of being carried for what felt like miles. She caught glimpses of towering pine trees, of a narrow trail winding up into mountains, of a small clearing where a rough cabin stood. The man kicked open the door and carried her inside, laying her carefully on a cot near a coal fireplace. Within minutes, he had a fire roaring, filling the small space with warmth and light. "You're hypothermic," he said, his large hands moving efficiently as he wrapped her in dry blankets. "Need to get you warm slowly, or your heart might stop." He disappeared and returned with a tin cup of lukewarm water. "Small sips," he instructed, holding the cup to her lips with surprising gentleness. Iris sipped obediently, her teeth chattering against the metal. As warmth gradually returned to her body, bringing with it painful tingling in her hands and feet, she became more aware of her surroundings. The cabin was sparse but well-built, with solid walls and a sturdy roof that kept out the rain. Tools hung neatly on one wall, a small stove sat in the corner, and the cot she lay on appeared to be the only bed. "Thank you," Iris finally managed to whisper. "You saved my life." The giant man nodded, pulling up a wooden chair to sit beside the fire. He seemed uncomfortable in the small space, too large for normal furniture, but his movements were careful and controlled. "My name is Magnus Oren," he said. "I'm a lumberjack, work the timber camps around here. This is my cabin. You're safe here." "Iris," she replied. "Iris Morgan." She hesitated, then added, "I can't go back to town." "Not yet. Maybe not ever." Magnus studied her for a long moment, taking in her torn dress, her bruised wrists, her fearful eyes. "Someone hurt you," he said. It wasn't a question. Iris nodded, tears threatening. "My employer. I worked at his boarding house. He thought that meant he owed me too. When I refused him, he got angry. I had to run." Magnus' jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "You don't have to go back," he said. "Not until you're ready. Not until you have somewhere safe to go." "But I have nowhere," Iris said, despair washing over her. "No family, no money, no friends. Gerald Hawthorne owns half of Timber Creek. He'll make sure no one helps me." Magnus was quiet for a while, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the rain hammering on the roof. Then he spoke, his words measured and serious. "I'll build you a cabin," he said, "right here, near mine. Somewhere you can live safely, where no one can hurt you. I'll cut the trees, mill the lumber, raise the walls myself. Won't take more than a few weeks if I work steady." Iris stared at him in disbelief. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "You don't even know me." Magnus looked down at his massive hands, scarred and calloused from years of hard labor. "Because 5 years ago, someone I care about needed help, and I wasn't there to give it," he said quietly. "My younger sister, Emma, she worked in a mill town down in California. Her employer was like your Hawthorne. Thought he could do whatever he wanted. When Emma fought back, he beat her so badly she never fully recovered. By the time word reached me and I got there, she was already gone, died from her injuries while I was still 3 days away." Iris felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I can't help Emma anymore," Magnus continued, meeting her eyes. "But I can help you, and I will. No one should have to live in fear. No one should have to run with nowhere to go. If I can give you a safe place, that's what I'm going to do." Over the next few days, as Iris recovered her strength, she learned more about Magnus Oren. He had been a lumberjack for 15 years, working his way up and down the Oregon coast, never staying in one place for long. After Emma's death, he had become even more isolated, building this remote cabin where he could be alone. The people in Timber Creek knew him as a giant who could fell trees faster than any 3 normal men, but they also feared him because of his size and his silence. Magnus left early each morning to scout timber, returning in the afternoons with news of his progress. He had found a good stand of straight pines on the far side of his property, perfect for cabin logs. He had marked the trees he would take, planned a foundation site near a small creek that would provide fresh water. He spoke about construction with the quiet confidence of someone who had built many structures before. Iris insisted on helping however she could. Her body was still weak from her ordeal, but she refused to be useless. She cooked meals from Magnus' simple supplies, mended his worn clothes, cleaned and organized his cabin. Magnus protested at first, saying she should rest, but Iris needed to feel like she was contributing something, even if it was small compared to what he was doing for her. On the 4th day, a visitor arrived. Iris heard horses approaching and felt immediate panic. Magnus was out marking timber, and she was alone. She grabbed the only weapon she could find, a heavy iron poker from the fireplace, and positioned herself behind the door. The knock was firm but not aggressive. A man's voice called out, "Magnus Oren, you in there? This is Sheriff Coleman from Timber Creek. Need to have a word." Iris's heart raced. Had Hawthorne sent the law after her? She stayed silent, hoping the sheriff would leave. Instead, she heard him walking around the cabin, his boots crunching on fallen pine needles. Then Magnus' deep voice rang out from the tree line. "Sheriff, what brings you all the way up here?" Iris moved to the window and saw Magnus emerging from the forest, his axe over one shoulder. The sheriff was a middle-aged man with a weathered face and a cautious expression. He dismounted and approached Magnus, staying a respectful distance away. "Got a report from Gerald Hawthorne," the sheriff said. "Says a woman who worked for him ran off after stealing money from his office. Says she might have come this direction. You seen anyone passing through?" Magnus' face remained neutral. "What's this woman supposed to look like?" The sheriff consulted a paper. "Iris Morgan, 24 years old, brown hair, slight build. Hawthorne says she's dangerous, mentally unstable, might hurt someone if cornered." Iris felt fury replace her fear. Hawthorne was making her out to be the dangerous one, the thief, the criminal. It was exactly what she had expected him to do, but hearing it still hurt. "I haven't seen anyone matching that description," Magnus said calmly. "Been working alone up here, like always." The sheriff studied Magnus carefully. "Hawthorne's offering a $100 reward for information leading to her return," he said. "That's a lot of money, Magnus. Sure you haven't seen anything?" "I'm sure," Magnus replied, his voice firm. "Now if you'll excuse me, Sheriff, I have work to do." After the sheriff left, Magnus came into the cabin and found Iris standing by the window, tears streaming down her face. "He's turned everyone against me," she said. "He's made me into a criminal. Even if I wanted to go back, even if I could prove what he did, no one would believe me now." Magnus pulled up his chair and sat down heavily. "Hawthorne's a coward," he said. "Powerful cowards always try to destroy the people who stand up to them, but he can't reach you here. And I meant what I said. I'm building you that cabin, and when it's done, you'll have a place where you're safe, where his lies can't touch you." "But what kind of life is that?" Iris asked desperately. "Hiding in the mountains, never being able to go to town, always looking over my shoulder. That's not living, that's just surviving. Right now, surviving is enough," Magnus said gently. "Later, when you're stronger, when you have a foundation under you, then we can think about more. But first things first, let's get you a home." The next morning, Magnus began felling trees. Iris watched from a distance, amazed by his strength and skill. He could bring down a massive pine with a dozen perfectly placed axe strikes, then limb it and section it with an efficiency that seemed almost impossible. By the end of the first day, he had 6 large logs ready for transport. "Can I help?" Iris asked that evening as they ate dinner. Magnus looked at her thoughtfully. "Tomorrow I'll be dragging logs to the building site," he said. "I could use someone to help guide them, make sure they don't get caught on obstacles. It's hard work, though. I'm stronger than I look," Iris said. "And I need to do something more than cook and clean." "Please." Magnus nodded slowly. "All right," he agreed. "But you tell me immediately if it's too much. No trying to push through pain or exhaustion." "Deal." "Deal," Iris said. Working alongside Magnus over the following days, Iris discovered reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. She learned to read the land, to anticipate where a dragging log might snag, to use leverage instead of pure force. Magnus was patient, showing her techniques, praising her progress. They fell into an easy rhythm, working from dawn until dusk, taking breaks to eat simple meals and rest in the shade. During these breaks, they talked. Magnus told stories about his years in the lumber camps, about the characters he had met, the dangerous situations he had survived. Iris shared her own history. Growing up in an orphanage in Portland, finding work wherever she could, always one step ahead of poverty and exploitation. They discovered they both loved reading, though neither had owned many books. They both found peace in nature, in the sound of wind through trees and the smell of pine. By the end of the second week, the foundation was laid and the first wall logs were in place. The cabin was taking shape, small but solid, positioned perfectly to catch morning sun and afternoon shade. Magnus worked with meticulous care, making sure every joint was tight, every corner square. This wasn't just shelter he was building. This was a home, made with skill and dedication that spoke louder than words about how much he cared. 3 weeks into construction, Iris woke one morning to find Magnus already gone and a note left on the table. "Gone to town for supplies. Back by afternoon. Stay inside." The note made her uneasy, but she understood. Magnus needed proper hardware for the cabin, nails and hinges that he couldn't make himself. Still, the hours passed slowly as she waited, jumping at every sound, imagining Hawthorne's men finding the cabin while Magnus was away. When Magnus finally returned in late afternoon, he wasn't alone. Behind him rode a woman about Iris's age, with red hair and a practical riding outfit. Magnus' expression was carefully neutral as he helped the woman dismount. "Iris, this is Catherine Wells," Magnus said. "She runs a general store in Timber Creek. She's a friend, and she brought supplies." Catherine smiled warmly at Iris, showing no fear or judgment. "I've heard some very interesting stories about you in town," she said. "Gerald Hawthorne has been quite vocal about the terrible woman who robbed him and ran away. But I've known Gerald for 10 years, and I know exactly what kind of man he is. So when Magnus came by cabin supplies and mentioned he was helping someone, I put 2 and 2 together." Iris felt defensive walls go up. "Are you here to turn me in for the reward?" "I'm here to help," Catherine said firmly. "Gerald Hawthorne is a predator who has gotten away with hurting women for far too long because he has money and influence. But he doesn't have influence over everyone. There are those of us in Timber Creek who would very much like to see him face consequences for his actions. Over coffee, Catherine explained that she was part of a small group of women in town who quietly helped others escape abusive situations. They operated carefully, knowing that open opposition to powerful men like Hawthorne could be dangerous. But they had resources, connections, and most importantly, they believed Iris. 3 other women have come forward privately, Catherine said, women who left Hawthorne's employment under suspicious circumstances. None of them would testify publicly because they're afraid, but they've told me their stories. Stories that match yours almost exactly. Hawthorne has a pattern, and we're gathering evidence. Iris felt hope stirring. But even with evidence, who would believe us over him? That's where things get interesting, Catherine said with a slight smile. The territorial governor is sending an inspector to Timber Creek next month to investigate complaints about working conditions in the lumber industry. If we can get testimony about Hawthorne to that inspector, someone from outside who isn't in Hawthorne's pocket, we might actually have a chance at justice. Magnus had been quiet during this exchange, but now he spoke. That's a month away, he said. What happens in the meantime? Hawthorne's still looking for Iris. She stays hidden here, Catherine said. I'll spread word in town that I saw a woman matching Iris's description boarding a stage heading south. That should throw Hawthorne off the trail. And Magnus, you should probably avoid town for a while too. People are already talking about why the hermit Lumberjack suddenly needed cabin building supplies. After Catherine left, Iris and Magnus sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Iris spoke. I don't know if I can do it, she said. Testify against him. Face him again. Just thinking about it makes me sick. You have a month to decide, Magnus said. And whatever you choose, you'll still have your cabin. You'll still be safe. Nobody can force you to do anything you're not ready for. But if I don't testify, he'll just keep hurting others, Iris said. Other women who might not be as lucky as I was, who might not find someone like you to help them. Magnus looked at her intently. You're stronger than you think, Iris, he said. I've watched you these past weeks. You've gone from barely able to stand to helping build an entire cabin. You face fear every day and kept moving forward. That takes courage most people don't have. Iris felt tears well up. I'm only strong because you made me feel safe, she said. You gave me space to heal, to remember who I was before fear took over my life. Without you, I would have died in that mud. And without you, I would have stayed alone in these mountains, convinced I didn't deserve companionship or connection, Magnus replied. You reminded me what it feels like to care about someone, to have purpose beyond just surviving. The moment hung between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Then Iris crossed a small space and took Magnus' huge, scarred hand in her smaller ones. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything, for saving my life, for building me a home, for believing me when no one else would. Magnus looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face. It's not charity, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I care about you, Iris. More than I probably should, more than I meant to. You've become important to me. You're important to me too, Iris said. I think I started falling in love with you somewhere between the second and third wall of my cabin. Magnus laughed, a deep rumbling sound that Iris realized she had never heard before. That's specific, he said. I'm a specific person, Iris replied with a small smile. So what do we do about it? We finish your cabin, Magnus said. We wait for the inspector. We face whatever comes together. And after that, if you're willing, maybe we see what it's like to build a life instead of just a house. The cabin was completed 2 days before the inspector was scheduled to arrive in Timber Creek. It stood solid and beautiful, with a pitched roof, a stone fireplace, windows that actually open and close, and a door locked that only Iris held the key to. Magnus had even built a small porch where she could sit and watch the forest. As Iris stood looking at her new home, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude and something else, something that felt remarkably like belonging. Catherine visited again, bringing 2 of the other women who had agreed to testify against Hawthorne. They sat together in Iris's new cabin, sharing their stories, finding strength in solidarity. By the end of the evening, They had all committed to speaking to the inspector, to telling the truth no matter how frightening it felt. The day the inspector arrived in Timber Creek, Magnus and Iris rode into town together. The sight of them caused a stir. Magnus rarely came to town, and the mysterious missing woman riding beside him answered a lot of questions. People stared and whispered, but Catherine was there to meet them, along with a stern-looking man in a territorial government uniform. Inspector Morrison, Catherine said, "These are the witnesses I mentioned." This took place in Catherine's store, with the door locked and curtains drawn. One by one, the women told their stories. Iris went last, speaking clearly despite her shaking hands, detailing exactly what Hawthorne had done and what she had been forced to flee. Inspector Morrison took detailed notes, his expression growing darker with each testimony. When they finished, he looked at each woman with respect. "Thank you for your courage," he said. "These are serious allegations, and I will investigate them thoroughly. Mr. Hawthorne will be asked to answer for his actions. But will anything actually happen to him?" One of the women asked bitterly. "He's rich and connected. He's also broken territorial laws regarding worker treatment and abuse." The inspector said firmly, "If your testimonies are corroborated by evidence, and I believe they will be, Mr. Hawthorne will face charges. Justice may move slowly, but it does move." The investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Inspector Morrison was thorough and relentless, interviewing dozens of people in Timber Creek, examining financial records, uncovering a pattern of abuse and exploitation that went back years. Within 2 weeks, Gerald Hawthorne was arrested and charged with multiple counts of assault, fraud, and labor law violations. The news spread to the territory like wildfire, and suddenly the women who had been too afraid to speak began coming forward with their own stories. Iris watched from the safety of her mountain cabin as the man who had terrorized her was finally held accountable. Catherine brought news from town each week, reporting on the case's progress. Hawthorne's lawyers tried every trick they knew, but the evidence was overwhelming. His boarding house was shut down, his property seized to compensate his victims, and he was sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison. The day the verdict was announced, Iris stood on her porch and cried, not from sadness, but from relief, so profound it felt like a physical weight lifting from her shoulders. Magnus found her there and simply held her while she wept, his massive arms creating a shelter where she could finally let go of all the fears she had been carrying. "It's over," she whispered. "It's really over." "It's over," Magnus agreed. "You're free now, truly free." Over the following months, Iris's life transformed in ways she had never imagined possible. She started helping Catherine at the general store, earning her own money for the first time in her life. The women of Timber Creek, who had once whispered about her, now treated her with respect, many of them privately thanking her for having the courage to stand up to Hawthorne. Children in town no longer feared Magnus after seeing him with Iris, and slowly the giant lumberjack became less a mysterious hermit and more of a respected member of the community. Magnus and Iris's relationship deepened naturally, without rush or pressure. He continued living in his cabin while she lived in hers, but they spent most of their time together, working, talking, simply enjoying each other's presence. Magnus taught Iris woodcraft and wilderness survival. Iris taught Magnus to read more complex books and to express his feelings with words instead of just actions. One evening in early spring, as they sat on Iris's porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink, Magnus pulled something from his pocket. It was a small wooden box he had carved himself, intricate and beautiful. Inside was a simple gold ring. "I'm not good with fancy words," Magnus said, his voice nervous despite his size. "But I know what I feel. You've given me a reason to stop hiding from the world. You've shown me that being strong isn't just about how much weight you can lift or how many trees you can fell. It's about having the courage to be vulnerable, to let someone see the broken parts and trust they won't run away. I love you, Iris Morgan. Will you marry me?" Iris felt tears streaming down her face as she looked at this gentle giant who had saved her life in every way that mattered. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you. I love you, Magnus Oren. You're the best man I've ever known." They were married in Catherine's garden on a warm summer day. The ceremony was small but meaningful, attended by the women who had fought alongside Iris, by Magnus' few friends from the lumber camps, and by townspeople who had come to respect them both. Iris wore a simple dress that Catherine had helped her make, and Magnus wore his best clothes, freshly cleaned and mended. When they exchanged vows, promising to support and cherish each other through whatever life brought, there wasn't a dry eye among the witnesses. After the wedding, Magnus and Iris decided to keep both cabins. Iris's smaller cabin became a sanctuary where she could work on the sewing business she had started, taking in alterations and making clothes for women in town. Magnus' cabin remained his workshop, filled with tools and ongoing projects. But they built a third structure between the two cabins, larger than either, that served as their shared home. Catherine approached them with a proposition 6 months after the wedding. "There are more women like you were," she said to Iris. "Women trying to escape dangerous situations. Women with nowhere to go. What if we created something to help them? A network of safe houses. A way to get them out of harm's way and help them rebuild their lives." Iris looked at Magnus, and he nodded. "We have the space," he said. "We could build more cabins up here. Create a place where women could stay while they figure out their next steps." And so the Mountain Haven was born. Over the next year, Magnus built 3 more small cabins on their property, each one as carefully constructed as Iris's had been. Women fleeing abuse, poverty, or exploitation found their way to these mountains, guided by Catherine's network. They stayed as long as they needed, healing in the safety and peace of the wilderness, learning skills that would help them build independent lives. Iris became the heart of the operation, using her own experience to help others navigate their trauma and fear. She taught them practical skills like sewing and cooking, but more importantly, she taught them of their past and defined their future, that they deserved safety and respect. Magnus provided the physical safety, his imposing presence ensuring that no abuser ever dared to follow anyone to Mountain Haven. But he also provided something gentler, showing these traumatized women that not all men were threats, that strength could be used to protect rather than harm. The work was challenging and often heartbreaking, but it was also deeply rewarding. Iris and Magnus watched woman after woman arrive broken and leave whole, ready to face the world again. Some stayed in the Oregon Territory, building new lives in nearby towns. Others moved on to fresh starts in different places. But all of them carried with them the knowledge that they had survived, that they were stronger than they had ever imagined. 5 years after they first met on that rainy road, Iris and Magnus sat on their porch watching their latest resident, a young woman named Rebecca, play with the 2 small children that Iris and Magnus had welcomed into their family. Their daughter Emma, named from Magnus' lost sister, was 3 years old and fearless. Their son Thomas was just learning to walk, stumbling across the porch with determination that reminded Iris of herself. "Can you believe this is our life?" Iris said, leaning against Magnus' solid shoulder. 5 years ago, I was dying in the mud with no hope. Now look at what we built. We built it together," Magnus said, wrapping his arm around her. "You gave me purpose, Iris. Before you, I was just existing. Now I'm living." Iris smiled. "You know what I think about sometimes," she said. "That moment when you found me in the rain. What if you had ridden past? What if you had decided it wasn't your problem?" "I couldn't have ridden past," Magnus said firmly. "The moment I saw you, I knew I had to help. Maybe it was fate, maybe it was chance. But I think some people come into our lives exactly when we need them most." "I think you're right," Iris agreed. She looked out at the mountains, at the cabins they had built, at the life they had created from nothing but determination and love. "We were both broken in different ways," she said. "But somehow, our broken pieces fit together perfectly." As the sun set behind the mountains and their children's laughter filled the air, Iris reflected on how far she had come. From homeless and terrified to safe and loved. From victim to survivor to helper of other survivors. The cabin Magnus had built her had been just the beginning, the foundation for a life richer than she had ever dared to dream. And Magnus, the lonely giant who had convinced himself he was too dangerous to love, had become the gentlest father, the most devoted husband, and a hero to countless women who had found safety in the haven he had created. His strength, once used only for felling trees, now protected the vulnerable and built homes where hope could take root and grow. If this story moved your heart, I hope you'll subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late for a new beginning. Leave a comment telling me which moment resonated most with you. Your support helps me continue creating these stories about resilience, redemption, and the transformative power of compassion. Thank you for being here. And remember that sometimes the darkest moments lead to the most beautiful destinations. We all deserve a safe place to call home, and we all have the power to be someone's refuge in the storm. Until next time, stay strong, stay compassionate, and never underestimate the difference one act of kindness can make.